I'm going to pop this out, throw some gloves on, and we're going to look at the striker assembly in the actual FCU outside of the frame and slide. Here's that FCU. If you go and buy just the FCU, that's what you get. And then the striker assembly. Okay, so orientation wise, these are like this. Then it sits like that, and that spring is compressed. When that spring is released and that sear drops, then it goes boop, and that flies forward, striking the primer. So those would sit on top of each other. As that raises, it hits that safety, but with this out, you can't just press this down. It has to be pushed in a little bit, and then that can move. So while it's sitting in the slide, even unattached, just like that, this has a little bit of compression on it, being held on with the plate on the back, the back plate. So it would be something more along the lines of this, and then that can kind of move freely, but this is still locked. There we go. All right, so that's engaged. You can kind of see it. That little silver spot in that hole is an actual slot on the striker, and then this black piece is stuck with tension from the spring and that spot, so it can't move. But when this is cocked all the way and that spring is compressed, this can move freely. But if it's fully out and this tries to drop, it can't go anywhere because of that piece there. However, if it weren't there, this would fly fully forward, and then this just sits on top of that slot, and then it gets recocked, and now it's safe again, right? So this would be that retracted, you don't actually see it poking through the hole, versus that the firing pin is actually poking through the hole in the slide. Okay, so that's how that works. And there is that little spring, in case you didn't notice that. That's the little spring holding this in place. So let's look at this. The disconnector does actually function. That's something from the voluntary upgrade program. So from up here, you have your sear, you have your lever safety, and your disconnector. Right, so back here, here's the whole trigger bar assembly, the trigger bar, and then your spring for your trigger. Now, let's see if we can do this. See if that can focus enough. Okay, so from back here, you get a little pointy device. So this guy right here, that is your actual sear. Okay, this little piece here is that lever that goes up and disengages the striker safety. This guy is your disconnector. So trigger bar is here, that wraps around and connects over to here. When you lift, oh, I'm not hitting it. When you lift that disconnector, aka when the slide goes back, it completely moves the ability for the trigger bar, which is that little piece you can see lifting right there. That lifts up and out of the way so that it can't even touch that striker or touch the sear. See, it goes right over it. But if I drop it, then it can go and start moving that sear, and that's what rotates it down to begin the whole process of it releasing the striker. So, and then I don't think you'll be able to see it too well from here. In this part of the trigger bar back here, that goes into this lever safety there, and that's what actually starts to move it. So here's the wall. That wall is literally where the trigger bar is interacting with the sear. That's what that stop is. So that moves all that much, and that is all it takes to fully disengage that striker safety. Again, not even moving the sear yet, so that may be an issue, it may not be an issue. I think it's an issue. That shouldn't be a thing. But you know, that's my 2 cents. So there are definitely issues in this assembly that can certainly be fixed. That is the sear, by the way, is sitting lower when it's out. When everything's all put together, that lifts up and actually sits flush about that. What is that, like 3, 4, 5 millimeters higher, and it's flush with that part on the back here. It sits about half a millimeter under that. Yeah. So there's that. Woohoo. That is the whole firing assembly, pretty much. Here is the mostly fully disassembled P320 FCU. I didn't feel the need to pull this whole block out and the disconnector and everything. So I got all our parts here, and then the striker mostly disassembled. I don't really feel the need to pop this off either, and that's a pain to get back in. Those type of springs are annoying. I don't even like taking them fully off so that I know which way they're oriented. Seeing one part of this has made me rethink one of my thoughts on it, but that's the main reason I wanted to get the full thing disassembled. So here's those big key players, right? So here's your full-on sear with the two springs on the back that kind of push it up and return it back to that position, or that neutral position to catch onto the striker, right? So you got two springs, that's nice. However, their positioning kind of ruins some of my thoughts. But I'm going to keep thinking on that one. And then this is that safety lever. So the way it kind of sits in there is that little... Ooh, I have tweezers. This little arch right here sits on top of the pin that holds the sear in place right there. Like that. Then there's another pin that goes through there and holds that in place. So when this is at rest, it's kind of resting on that pin right there. When you push that trigger bar back, dang it, I launched the spring. As you push the trigger back, it pulls this into here, hitting this little notch here, rotating it up on this pin, disengaging this lever, pushing it up, and we'll get to all that in a second. Once it gets to about there, that bar is now engaging the actual sear itself and starts to press it down, pivoting on this point, compressing those springs, and then dropping the striker. Okay, so that's how those function. I want to show you on the striker how it is that hitting that pre-travel, like I've probably mentioned already, which, and ironically, I just saw that Wyoming Gun Project released his video confirming that. So I'm not even going to bother trying to go find a prime case or like he did the pencil test. I didn't want to do the pencil test because, like he mentions, it's not guaranteed that it would set off a primer. But I've been shooting this gun for a long time. I know the difference in sound between this fully falling and it being blocked. So I want to show you a couple things real quick. So I didn't want to take this apart. So that little notch coming out is the curve coming off of this. So that sits like that. And it sits on here. And that little thing goes in there when it's about here, about halfway down the circle. That is where it is locked into place. You can see the shelf on the striker right there. That little tiny notch. Let me hold that. This little tiny notch is where that sits. That's nothing. That is next to nothing. Actually, this one I will measure. All right, that's about as close as I can get it. I'm not going to spend forever on here. All right, so with these, we get that little tiny nub that comes out of the back is another way that you can measure. Oh, that's rounded. It won't sit in there flush. That looks just about straight. It won't go down anymore. So yeah, that is on the shelf. It just looks like there's a tiny little gap, but it's sitting on there. And that looks pretty even. That is the disengagement that needs to happen on this pin to pop up over that striker and drop it. That is a flaw. Wyoming Gun Project was very careful in the way he spoke, saying, you know, it's his opinion. I'm going to go ahead and tell you from a safety standpoint, in terms of engineering, that is 100% a flaw, and that does not need to be cut so low to pass through here. That could be cut higher. Let me show you. That is a full circle. There's nothing else in there making it not be able to cut a little higher. They didn't need to cut that much out of it, right? So that whole thing can go up. That needs to be built up a little bit, 100%. When it comes to the sear, though, let's look at this. One of the things I didn't like is that this sear goes all the way back. This literally sits so that those two springs. Let me get my handy dandy flashlight. Those two springs sit in that very back corner. Those two little square holes in the back right there is where those springs sit. Okay? So it's all the way back. And there's not really a good spot to put those again. Let me get that flashlight. Like if it were to be redesigned. There we go. Because that next little lip, so you see that little T, that next lip down isn't a great surface, but I don't think that that truly needs to be redesigned. That might be a bit much. So I think these four parts right here, all four of them need some sort of redesign. This one, maybe not, if raising this a little more does the trick. But it could be a combination of both, since there isn't a massive amount. I mean, yeah, that's a lot. We can probably get that. Yeah. These are the four parts that I'm going to be focusing on. This, that is actually probably too complicated to deal with, but we'll see. It's possible that there's not a whole lot of play in this part to change timing, and it could be that because there's more surface area that can go up this way on that safety, one of these two pieces, either this one or the actual lever, needs to be adjusted, but that can be done. So, like I said, again, if you are someone who can make these parts and harden them, not necessarily this, that probably doesn't need to be super hardened, but something like this, a small part with complex geometries like that, reach out to me. I'm gonna hopefully be trying to get these CAD files done this week. I'm gonna try. Don't quote me on that. I'm gonna try to redo those four parts and possibly this one, depending on how this goes, and start testing these. Because I genuinely think if you adjust those four in a certain way, this will eliminate all the issues. To anyone thinking, well, that's going to make it heavier. Yeah, it might. And guess what? Those trigger springs and everything else can be adjusted after the fact, one step at a time. Okay? You got to take the whole picture of what the goal is, break it into little steps, and take care of it. So the biggest issue is that. That's going to be the first part that I work on. Next is going to be this striker and raising that. If we raise that, that's going to be the first thing. I'm not even going to adjust these yet. I'm just going to work on those two parts primarily. And then the tolerancing on this is crazy. That little tiny thing, there's so much room back here. Like, fill in that gap. That needs to be filled in, especially with that sear right there. That can be fixed. That's more just closing off the ability to get to that sear from outside of the gun. So that's my thought. Yeah, this video might be long. It might also be multiple videos. So, all right, thanks for watching, guys. We're getting closer and closer to this.